Howdy and welcome, kids. It is time once again for Conscious Embodiment, Dreams, and Astrology with Dr. Michael Lennox. That's me. I'm here with Zoe. We're talking about April 29th through May 5th. And I got good news, Zoe. We're the quietest week in a while. The craziness is behind us.
All right.
Thank God. It is a much, much quieter landscape. We'll talk a little bit about it. But it is the fifth Monday of the month. So we have a special episode on the fifth Monday. We always do, instead of a dream, we have a guest.
Yeah.
I have a guest coming in today, my dear friend, Lauren Schneider, who is a psychotherapist who also does work with tarot. And she has combined these two disciplines and is doing some really beautiful work on the planet these days. So she's coming in to talk all about her stuff. But of course, we have a question came in from Donna, so let's start with that. Donna writes, Michael, what does a symbol that looks like a circle with an X in it represent in a natal chart? I can't find an explanation for it in any of the supporting information. She also says a couple of other things that I don't quite follow, but she says that she has her circle with the X inside of it at 5 degrees of Aries in her natal chart. Is this something you would consider when evaluating a person's chart? Thanks, Donna. Well, great question, Donna. That circle with the X in it is called the part of fortune. And Western astrologers have adopted this particular data point from Arabic astrology. So I'll start by saying, yes, I cast my charts with the part of fortune. But then as I talk about, how I do or do not use it, we'll jury's out as to whether there's any value in this esoteric point. But let's talk about what it is, first and foremost. So Arabic astrology, which I know almost nothing about, works in these things called parts of or lots. These are sometimes called the lots of, like a part or a lot being a kind of, I don't know, it's like a measurement of things. So the part of fortune is specifically a calculation that requires knowing where the sun is, where the moon is, and where the eastern horizon, the rising sign of a chart is, and it calculates something called the part of fortune. It's like the sweet spot or the pot of gold point. It's a point in the 360-degree points of the zodiacal wheel that is sort of highlighted as your best little energetic place. So Arabic astrology has all sorts of parts, part of fortune, part of water journeys, part of mothers, part of fathers, part of career. There's all of these different calculations that make up how Arabic astrology works. And again, I'll repeat, I don't know anything about that, and I have no idea why Western astrology grabbed this one particular piece of Arabic astrology and said, yeah, we're going to pay attention to this. I don't know why. How one works with the part of fortune, how I work with the part of fortune is you might look at a chart and see how someone's part of fortune is interacting with other parts in the chart. And then, therefore, the part of fortune is bringing some ease and grace and, fortune to a setup in the chart. I have an example in my own chart that I think will help. Well, it will certainly help understand how I consider the working with the part of fortune. I have Saturn in Aquarius, 18 degrees in my second house. That's important for the story because the second house is the money house, and Saturn brings restrictions. So I also have part of fortune in Aquarius, 4 degrees away from my Saturn. So it's close enough to be conjunct. So the second house really is the money house, and your attitudes around finances can be described by what rules your second house and what planets might be in it. And any astrologer will tell you Saturn in the second house is not good for money. But I had an experience in my 20s when all of my age mate friends were complaining about never having enough money and saving money and always having something come up to take it away. I was never having that experience. I was the one who was saying, holy shit, I need a root canal, and suddenly there's an $800 excess in my checking account. Or my tires blew out. Thank God I have that savings. So I already had an attitude about finances that was more intuitive and spiritually based, trusting the flow, recognizing that I was cared for. And for my money, I don't think I could have had that attitude if I didn't have part of fortune in the money house, near my Saturn, softening the edges of how I might have financial struggles because of an attitude around money, which I certainly was raised in a home to make that a possibility. But I didn't have that. And I was able to transcend my financial limitation consciousness that ran my early life. And money flows quite well. And I think part of that's the part of fortune. So that's how I would use part of fortune in a session if I'm looking at a chart. If I see a patterning that might be challenging, I might see how the part of fortune interacts with it to sort of soften the difficulty of it. But it is an esoteric point, and I'm not really sure why we work with it. And so I understand why you would ask. So before we get into what the planets are doing this week, I have a couple of announcements. First of all, it's the first Thursday of the month on Thursday, so it's time for my global healing meditation. I gather every first Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific time in my Zoom space for an hour. It's absolutely free. I talk all about the astrology of the month, and then we lead a little guided meditation, and we're in and out in an hour. I hope some of you will join me for that this Thursday night. But the big announcement is really my next class starts on Saturday, May 4th. Radical Forgiveness, one of my anchor classes, one of my absolute favorite to teach, because I got to tell you, kids, forgiveness work was the linchpin that undid all of the blockages that allowed me to have the integration that I experienced today. So all unforgiveness takes us through the story, then to the anger that we have about the story. Underneath that anger is the vulnerability and the grief that needs our attention, and that's where the healing can happen. So if this sounds interesting to you, if you're having some anger at either a person or an institution or the world at large today, which is certainly going on for a lot of people, this might be the class for you. Go to michaellennox.com, check it out, and I might see some of you there on Saturday. So we are so complete with the craziness that April brought us through. I almost have nothing to talk about astrologically for the 7 days that this podcast covers. There's just not a lot to talk about. I mean, there's stuff happening every day, but I don't talk about every single little minutia detail on this podcast. I give you the broad strokes. It's also ironic that we don't even have a lunation. We're in the third quarter moon tomorrow, in fact. So we are a week ahead of our last full moon and a week before the next new moon. So there isn't really anything to talk about with regard to having a lunation to describe. Now, we are still in the lunar cycle kicked off by an eclipse. So there might not be any big chunky new geometry to grapple with in these 7 days up ahead. We're still riding a very tumultuous wave. So please try to keep that in mind, especially as we move through tomorrow, because we're in the third quarter moon, one of the crises in the lunar cycle. So every lunar cycle has four major pillars. The new moon is where we alpha, omega, and start things up. And then there's a crisis a week later when the sun and the moon are at a 90-degree angle with each other. We're at the crisis of will the seeds of intention that we set, fail or thrive. If you literally planted some seeds in the ground and watered them, 7 days later, they would all be cracking open. That's the crisis. Some would begin to take root and thrive, and others would fail. That's the first quarter crisis. Full moon, we all know, is the harvest of the benefit and the turnaround where we must leave something behind. What we're moving through tomorrow is the third quarter moon of this cycle, where now, once again, the sun and the moon are at odds with each other. They're relating in 90 degrees, the angle of conflict and obstacle. Only we're 3/4 through the lunar cycle. We're not at the beginning where we're bumping up against hard walls. We've learned a thing or two. We've been through the full moon. This full moon was epic, and we released a lot of deep unconscious and hidden processes as we moved through it. So that as we move through the first couple of days of this week, we are in a crisis of what we call dissemination. In fact, the piece of the lunar cycle that happens right after the third quarter is called the disseminating moon. Disseminate means to put out into the world, to push things out. So the third quarter moon's crisis is usually about having to be tested or bring your A game or show up with a wisdom that you've just sort of acquired. And since the full moon that we're just coming out of was so transformative, there may be some crises today, tomorrow, and Wednesday that directly relate to whatever you were emotionally going through at the full moon last week. Something we talked about last week was Venus leaving her sort of yucky place of Aries and moving into her home turf of Taurus. So one of the other things that would sort of make this week a little easier and more grounded is not only is all of the tumultuous stuff in our rearview mirror, but our emotional body, which was really on fire all month long, is now home in Taurus, nice and grounded. It's an earth sign. And it's where she's most at home. Then tomorrow, Mars is going to leave Pisces and move into Aries, his home sign. So that's another reason why we haven't actually moved into this energy, but it's another reason why this week will feel a little bit more like us back to ourselves in a way, right? Our heart centers are ruled by, the right sign of Venus, and our action and our decision making is finally returned to the place where we are most at home with choices and decisions and goals and projects. Aries. So Mars stays in a sign for about 6 weeks, and so for the next 6 weeks we are more assertive, ready to take action. Mercury has sort of finally turned around and is moving again. And so we've got our minds ready to catch up. And now our bodies will be ready to start taking action, right? Mars in Pisces for the last 6 weeks has made our practical physical experience more challenging because it's like we're underwater. We don't know what to do. We have more difficulty with being clear and precise about what to choose. And that changes tomorrow when Mars finally returns home. And then we have a lovely, essentially 3 weeks with both Venus and Mars in their home signs. And that puts us in just a little bit more organic, centered place. Feelings are stable. Decisions are clearer. We're good to go. So I'm going to do a little Venus report, but I got to tell you, kids, this is it. I'm not going to sit here and just chew my mouth off to fill the time. And yes, I could go day to day and I could talk about other little things. I'm not going to do this. It's a short podcast episode this week because there's just less to talk about. But as you know, I've been talking about Venus every week, and I will keep doing this until she returns to Leo, where she did her last retrograde. And there's actually some big energy coming tomorrow when Mars is sort of pushing into Aries, bringing a little more fire back to the atmosphere. Venus is going to be taking us through a big potential squeeze. So your emotional life, your relationship experience might bump into some shadow and some lessons. The two transits that happen on the same day, Venus semi-squaring Saturn, that's a pure lesson. It's a semi-square, which means it's a mild lesson, right? A full square from Venus to Saturn would be, well, a big conflict. This is half that, semi, right? So for sure, there's a squeeze. Something will slow down, break down, need your attention, demand some looking at some stuff, will be present with Venus in a semi-square from Saturn. It's the square to Pluto that makes it deeply intense, potentially transformative. And just understand that as we move through the beginning of this week, where we're also in the third quarter moon and Mars changing signs, we got some crankiness that has to do with your emotional body. If this last full moon and the new moon that kicked off the cycle brought you anything challenging in the area of relationship dynamic, you might be addressing that early this week, and it might not feel smooth and yummy. So know that and understand that. So the most challenging stuff from April is behind us. We got a new moon in a week that will put us in a brand new lunar cycle. We got a new month in the calendar coming up in the next couple of days. So really and truly, we have been through the ringer, but we're not quite out of the woods. So while I don't have a lot to say about big energies this week, we're still in some version of an eclipse wormhole. Try to keep that in mind. And then just know when we get together next week, we will be talking about the new moon in Taurus that will kick next week off with a sort of beautiful, grounded, loving capacity to set intentions for some stable experiences of love and all the Taurus cash and prizes, kids. We're almost fully out of the woods. Not quite. Have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily Astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily Astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com.
I'm so excited for today's guest. I'm going to read her bio before I introduce her to y'all. For over 3 decades, Lauren Schneider, MA, MFT, has integrated family systems, hypnotherapy, dream work, and her pioneering method, terapy, as a highly effective method of spiritual psychotherapy. She's combining therapy and tarot. Dream work and terapy access inner wisdom, creative imagination, and higher consciousness for guidance, healing, and problem solving. Lauren has her practice in Santa Barbara, California. In addition to individual consultations, Lauren facilitates workshops, trainings, and ongoing groups for healing practitioners. I like that, healing practitioners, kids, and laypersons. Articles on dreams and therapy are published in the Encyclopedia of Sleep and Dreams and Ecotherapy, Healing with Nature in Mind. We're going to talk all about her book when we get going in our conversation. But welcome, Lauren. Thank you for coming
Thank you,
on my
Michael.
podcast.
So good to see you again.
Honey, do you remember how we met?
I don't remember exactly how we
Neither
met.
do I. But first of all, I mean, listening to your bio, there isn't anybody in my audience who wouldn't think that, we're brother and sister from another mother. Like we're right up there.
Absolutely.
So
And as I've said, you are my favorite person to talk to about anything dreams.
yay. Well, I
And
know that's how we connected because we did some
yes,
facilitation together and some talks and workshops.
yes.
So, but this is all about you and your work because I'm fascinated that you actually did something that I sort of have done a little bit. I don't really practice as a psychotherapist, and that I know a lot of people dabble with, but you took on the blending of a kind of scientific approach to psychotherapy and mysticism. And that's why you're here. That's what I want to talk about. Can I first, though, just ask, like, about how you were drawn to become a psychotherapist? Like, tell us that story.
Well, I was in film and I had been training as a film theorist. So I was looking at film, movies, images through the lens of psychotherapy,
Love
of
that.
psychoanalysis.
Yes.
And ended up in film production where everybody in my department was depressed. And a woman who I didn't think knew me very well one day said to me, "You know, you ought to be a therapist," because everybody was lining up at my office.
That's
And it
right. You were
just
doing it
hit me.
already. Right.
I was doing it already. And it just hit me at one of these moments where, yeah, I was done with the way that people treated each other in that
Mm,
field. And I left my job having absolutely no idea what I was going to do.
love that.
And I left the job. I left a love affair with the editor, and my rental house was being sold. And so I was
Wow.
without any job, any home, any boyfriend. I was at a complete loss. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this,
Yeah.
those times
Yep.
where life as you know it ends and things are in upheaval. And I think we're feeling a lot of that right now. But these are also times when we become open to being redirected, to hearing that small voice inside, the authentic, deeper self, or maybe signs from the universe.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me. Over this summer, two strangers, 2 weeks apart, handed me divination tools. One handed me the I Ching, which is
Hmm.
an ancient book of
Yes.
wisdom, and the other handed me tarot. And they both said the exact same thing, which is you're supposed to walk with these.
Both, but these are wait. Two different people, two different tools saying the same thing
Saying the
after an
exact
office
same
full of people
thing.
telling you should become a psychotherapist. So the world really was
Yes,
lining up to show you what to do.
exactly. I was being directed rather
Yeah.
than this being my own idea initially. And I had no idea what these mystical tools were. I did not know that I was, well, I guess since I was quite little, I was always fascinated by mysticism.
Hmm.
And my childhood books were Narnia series and A Wrinkle in Time. And it's not surprising that these were
No,
written by Christian mystics.
that's right. They're
But,
very mystical stories.
yeah, but this was a waking up for me.
Yeah.
And I asked the second person if he would help me to read the cards or read the I Ching. And he didn't teach me about the symbolism. He didn't teach me about the tradition of tarot or the tradition of I Ching. He just showed me how to pull a card or how to get a hexagram. And over that few weeks,
Huh.
I heard a very deep voice in me saying, I need to sit on my butt for 2 months and I'll know what to do at the end of it. And at the end of it, I applied to a master's program in marriage and family therapy. And I walked into that master's program with tarot in one pocket and I Ching in the other, having, again, no
Yeah.
idea what I was
Yeah.
supposed to do with these.
This is I so identify with this because I had a similar sort of entrance into the traditional world of psychotherapy, but I already brought my mystical approach to dreams and my sort of stuff. And I got a lot of pushback in grad school because of that. Talk about that a little bit. How did it land in you to sort of say, here's what I'm interested in, and have a traditional landscape sort of push back and say, well, maybe yes, this, but not that?
Well, I think I wandered off on my own into this intersection between mysticism and science. So I wasn't telling my fellow students what I was doing, but I began to experiment by saying, well, what happens if you apply psychotherapy? What happens if you apply hypnotherapy? What happens if you apply family systems to playing with the cards? And I was just curious and experimenting and playing. So initially, I kept my license separate from my therapy practice because I was afraid my license would get burned at the stake,
Right.
metaphorically.
Right.
Right. And I started seeing people word of mouth. But in terms of the pushback, I did my master's thesis in 1985 on using tarot and I Ching as tools of psychotherapy.
Good for you.
And I had the most academic advisor possible, which was really good for me
Yeah.
because she had no idea what I was doing, and truly neither did I at this point. But she then demanded that I really ground this in psychotherapy principles. And then when I began to practice, I mean, I would be at networking meetings and people would walk away from me if I mentioned I was doing tarot. I got a lot of rolled eyes from colleagues.
Yes.
But I found that when I was doing a session, it would get to the heart of the issue in one session. It would reveal what somebody had been trying to hide from themselves, or it would bring up profound insights and profound shifts in one session. And so it was so inspiring that I jumped over my own insecurity and integrated therapy into my regular practice very quickly.
And what does that look like inside of a session, say from the client's perspective? I come in, I'm having a struggle. You know what the struggle is because we've been talking about it for a while, and I launch into the day's session here, blah, blah, blah. Take us through what happens.
So, yes, you're going to launch into what's brought you into therapy and what's concerning you in that moment. And I'm going to listen for 15 minutes or so, and then I'm going to invite you to do a therapy session. So I have about 50 plus decks. That includes tarot, oracle cards, dream cards,
yeah.
any deck that contains evocative imagery, anything that attracts you for your audience. You can go to any deck that attracts you, but the one guideline I do have is that every card has some sort of evocative imagery because we're not approaching tarot or other oracles with preset definitions. We're listening to psyche. Psyche's showing up. So when somebody picks a deck or several decks, those decks and those cards that they happen to pick randomly tend to be so specific to the person, which would not happen if we were using, let's say, just the traditional Rider-Waite deck. So the synchronicities are profound. And what I'm doing is I'm allowing the images to catch my attention. I'm asking the person about the images. For example, in the Karma Tarot deck that this woman picked, she said she was worried about her sons, but didn't give any more information. And in that particular card that she picked, of the Moon card, most of us, if you've seen the traditional Rider-Waite, you see two towers or two structures in the card. In the Karma Tarot, there were two wine bottles. And that jumped out and grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
And so if an image grabs my attention, I will just ask a question. Is there a drinking problem in the family? Well, both sons were alcoholic and the husband have died of it.
Okay.
And this is the kind of thing that happens where it just drops right into the deeper unconscious and the images come alive. We're dealing with psyche laid out on the table. So it's profound.
This does remind me of dream work and having an image and an irrational sense of sensation and emotional responsiveness that the dream content brings, and then it reveals some stuff, but this is juicier.
Oh, no, it's just like dreams. Although the thing I say is it's like dreaming with your eyes open. It's and all of the practices that I have in terms of how I decode an image, how I respond to an image, all comes from dream work.
Yeah, well, of course.
It's very integrated. So the only difference I would say about doing therapy is that synchronicity has such a powerful healing effect Because when we dream, we assume, of course, this comes out of us, our deepest unconscious, and
Right.
we're really listening to the deeper self, right? When that deeper self comes out on the table in this random selection of images,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, this person is what I'd like to say is that these synchronicities are like a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah.
It
They become
breaks us out
undeniable,
of,
right?
yes, they're undeniable, and it breaks us out of our illusion of separation. So all
Yeah.
of a sudden, my insides are connected to my outsides, and something greater than myself, some invisible mastermind has orchestrated the exact thing I needed to see. And so we begin, just like we do with dream work, we begin to connect to something so much greater than ourselves in terms of a higher consciousness and intelligence. And we also learn how to trust ourselves more deeply, right? When we listen to dreams, same thing with therapy.
Yeah.
Every time you connect with an image, it deepens your own intuition.
How did you bridge the gap between having a kind of fractured sensibility, my traditional licensable work over here, this more mystical work over there? You obviously dove into a much more fully integrated place as you are now, that comes with a book and a practice and a whole bit. I'm most curious about that that shift into owning it, because that must have been,
Mm.
you pushing through some resistance that had been there for a while, easily bolstered by people pushing back at you. How did you push them together into this beautiful integration you're in now?
Yeah, such great questions. This is why I love to talk to you.
Oh, thank you.
Um, so I did integrate therapy into my practice early on,
Mm.
but I was cautious about who I was inviting to do it. I mean, I had very
Okay, that makes
traditional
sense. Got it.
psychotherapy clients as well.
Got it. Right.
I found places where there was kinship,
Mm,
right? I found an international dream association and back in
yeah.
2001 and began to go every year. And these were my people. Initially, when I first proposed that I teach therapy, they said, well, that's not night dreaming. So you can't do it. So then I had to push back
Mhm.
and
Okay.
keep showing how this was very aligned with dream work. And once they accepted that, I was presenting every year. So there were
Oh,
places,
oh, great.
yeah, like the International Association for the Study of Dreams, there were places where I got to grow
Yeah.
into my voice. But you're right, it took 25 years and such profound experiences of deep mystical psychological work, because there was no separation between psychological and the spiritual that was happening as I worked therapy with people. The work became deeper and deeper and deeper until I was so pregnant with it that I
Yeah.
couldn't
Yeah.
not just commit fully to it. But the other thing that happened is I got burnt out.
Oh.
And I
Oh.
left my practice in 2017. I was burnt out as a traditional therapist. As a traditional therapist, I carry an overdeveloped sense of responsibility that I'm supposed to fix the
Yep.
client.
I know that feeling.
And it's an incredible,
Yeah,
painful burden.
it is.
And it creates great anxiety. So if a client comes in deep anxiety and depression, I'm going to feel it. But with therapy, I so trust that I'm going to be guided by the images. I so trust that
Mhm.
the images are a medium
Mhm.
between their unconscious and my
Mhm.
unconscious. I so trust this invisible presence that enters into the session with this random selection of cards that it deactivates that complex. And I just allow the images to guide the session. I don't have to know. And what happens is it initiates both the client and myself into flow. And then we're into something magical. And so the sessions are so inspiring, both for the client and myself, that I've had people come out of depression in one session. I am inspired. I never ceases to amaze me. I'm never bored.
Yeah.
People talk about watching paint dry when you're doing psychotherapy. And I have such great respect for psychotherapists and for the deep work and the lot work that they may do. But this really does accelerate the whole
Yeah,
process.
and we need accelerants, the
Yes,
somatic, work accelerates it by, working with the body, and this, by working with the
yeah.
soul and the psyche in a deeper way. How did the book come about?
Mhm. I think for most of us, something happened to us during COVID and the shutdown.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so this is a pandemic, expression. Love that.
Well, I was approached, 23 years ago by Jeremy Tarcher, who was the pioneer of New Age psychology. And he got it. He got therapy and he said, New York's waiting for your book. But he
Mm,
also thought I wasn't ready. And I really did need the last 15 years
yes.
up to 2020 of my work to have so deepened that truly I was pregnant with it and ready to pop. The other thing is, as I said, I was burned out in traditional psychotherapy. And so I left my practice. So I had 3 years where I was on hiatus and the pandemic happened. And I don't think it was just that I was isolated and had the time to do this. It really was that the collective pressure cooker we're in was calling forth this book because, and I imagine you're feeling this
Oh,
with
honey, it
dreams.
was the same thing. I started teaching shadow work and self-investigation in 2020 because it was what was being called for. So I love that. The
Yeah.
world really craving this work that you're offering.
Yeah, there's a reason that tarot and astrology and dream work
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
psychedelics, there's
Yep,
a reason they're
that's right,
trending with
that's right.
psychotherapy.
Yep.
And the reason is because we are desperately trying to break through this rational, patriarchal, forgive me, consciousness that we've been steeped in for
Yes,
a couple thousand years because we get that it's not sustainable and we're needing a higher consciousness.
yes.
And we are on the precipice of a consciousness shift. So I think the work that we're doing is really being called for to help people find deeper resilience, to tap into that deeper consciousness so that they can navigate through these times. And also, I believe that these are divination tools. They connect us with
Yeah,
something like the divine that is, it's not religious, but it is something that is eternal.
beautiful. Who is this book for? Is this book for practitioners to work with others? Is this for a person to understand their own self-investigation with psychotherapeutic principles and tarot? Like
Yes,
both? Yes,
yes,
yes, I
yes,
love that.
yes,
So
yes,
say
yes,
a little bit
all of
about
it.
that. So remember, you're talking to a handful of thousand people who, some of whom will be like, want to check this out. Describe what that is for someone to receive and use and work with this book.
Funny enough, I come back to your question about pushback because I feel like I've had pushback all the way, and I'm a rebel, so pushback
Yep.
uh,
Strengthens.
triggers my rebel.
Yep. Love that.
My publisher pushed back because he couldn't understand how I could write a book that was for psychotherapists to develop a methodology that will work in psychotherapy. It's a very comprehensive methodology, but how could I include speaking to lay people? Well, when I teach, I've never differentiated. If I'm with a group of psychotherapists, I'm going to make sure that I'm teaching um, to their orientation. But at the same time, there are non licensed healers that are gifted.
Yeah.
There are lay people that need these kind of tools for themselves, just like dreams. Dreams are democratic.
Yeah.
We don't have a hierarchy in who gets to work with
Yeah.
dreams.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the same thing is true for me with therapy. So I had to push back and say, no, this book is going to be conversational and it's going to be for psychotherapists, tarot enthusiasts, lay people, people who know nothing about tarot at all, and walk them through the process of how do you begin to relate to images and develop your intuition and use these as a guidance tool.
Beautiful.
And when I teach, the other thing is, I I proposed to the Board of Behavioral Science and to CAMP, which is my union, my organization as a marriage family therapist, that I teach therapy as a tool to psychotherapists and get continuing education credit. And I got it.
You got
So,
it.
I got it. It took a
Okay, that's
while.
it.
I
Okay, for
got it.
anybody listening, this is a very, 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 very big deal. And because it's also a step in the direction of growing and expanding the ways in which people can self-investigate and bring the divine and the mysticism in at a time when we need it so desperately.
And again, I don't think I did this all by myself. I
Yeah.
worked really hard to knock on those doors, but I think the times are meeting where I am
Yeah,
in terms of being somebody who really has integrated mysticism with psychotherapy, with science. And we're seeing that everywhere. Quantum physics is describing what the ancient mystics knew all
that's right.
along, which is
That's right.
there's no separation between psyche and matter. And we need to understand that our minds, our thought, our consciousness is very powerful and helps to shape matter. And that's important to understand at this time, that we're not entirely helpless to the world we see.
And so this sort of leads me to my sort of last question, which is the horrible question that I've been asked a handful of times. I feel badly asking it, but like, but you did speak to something powerful about the idea that as we bridge these two sort of realms, that the mystical and the practical, which I think are already bridged in our bodies, like our bodies are in both realms already, right? That there's some way to sort of meet the world where the world needs to be met right now. Can you speak a little bit to the world gone mad, the precipice and the cliff we seem to be about ready to fall off, and your thoughts about resilience?
Okay, let me start with the thoughts about resilience in a really concrete way. I've been working with people who are experiencing significant loss, loss of a soulmate, loss of a mother. And when we work together, I had clients come in saying, "Oh, I was going to cancel the session. I'm overwhelmed. I'm just too depressed." And as they begin to work, like for example, the woman who just lost her mother, the image that came up was two women together and the mother's head had fallen off.
Oh, wow.
And the next image was a stump of a mother in black,
Hmm.
but she was just a stump. And this woman could connect to, yes, this is what it feels like when you lose a mother. It feels like you've lost your appendages. So now she feels that she's being connected to exactly where she's at.
Where she's
And
at.
then, yeah, and then, so we're being met, right? We're being completely met. We're not alone in our suffering. We're being met by something greater. And that's what happens with dreams, and it's what happens with therapy. And you're being shown through the images a map for how to walk through it. So then she had a dream, and in the next therapy layout that she laid out to get further guidance on the dream, there was this huge stag with a shield. And the dream was that she got a knock on the door. She walked to the door and she saw that the stones at the threshold of the door were taken away. That's right, right? When we've lost somebody, the boundary between the waking world and the world of soul, the boundary's gone.
Yeah.
And this stag with the shield became her ally that she then walked with every day because he was the guardian of the threshold to help walk with her
Ooh, to
while
help
her
cross.
world was being
Yes,
recreated.
that's
Now,
right.
this is an individual
Right.
explanation, but let me make it more collective. We are in an upheaval sociopolitically, our environment, everything's in upheaval. And what I believe and see from doing dream work and therapy, because I've been having big collective dreams since 2000, is that we're dealing with the collapse of a patriarchal and dualistic paradigm.
Yes.
This is why we're seeing such polarities getting more and more heightened and conflictual, because dualistic consciousness is falling apart.
That's right.
It doesn't work. It's not sustainable. So when you talk about how the mystic and the science is already integrated fully in our body, and when we talk about how quantum physics and mysticism are now, parallel or mirroring each other, we're talking about an integration that is happening at a global consciousness level. And I believe that our work is just to participate in this shift.
Yeah, boom.
Boom.
That's right. That's it. That's our work. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Tell us, name the book. Where do we find it, and where do we find you?
So the book is called Therapy. It's All in the Cards.
I love that.
And my favorite thing, there's a woman dancing on Freud's couch on the
On
cover.
the cover of the book? That's fabulous.
It's just delightful.
That's fabulous.
Because this is also how to re-engage our play and our creativity and our joy in the midst of
In the
what's
midst
happening,
of
right?
all of what's happening, yes.
Okay, so Therapy, It's All in the Cards. It's on Amazon, and you can easily get it there. If you can support local bookstores, it's also
That's
at
right.
Chaucer's in Santa Barbara. It's also at Paradise Found in Santa Barbara. I haven't gone the way of doing bookstores throughout the country, but it'll get there. And I am, you can get to me through my website, dreamsandtherapy.com, and that's TAROTPY,
Yeah.
all one word. Also, you can reach me on my email, which is Lauren, LAURENZ, at dreamsandtherapy.com.
Well, beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I knew this conversation was going to be juicy and timely and beautiful, and thank you so much.
What a joy to connect with you, Michael. Thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful.
Fabulous.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.